tuning in to this episode of the Security Clearance Careers Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Keller, and today our guest is joining us again on ClearedCast. So, Symone B, who joined us last year, you can search for that episode called Unlocking Success in GovTech Insider Tips to Making Over 200K and Navigating the Cleared Job Search. And you shared a ton about your story and how you were able to climb up the ladder in this industry from a really young age. So in
Yeah.
that one, we chatted about some tricks for the job search and some myths that needed debunking. But this time, we're going to dive into a little bit more into the national security tech industry and really talk about some of the hottest GovTech jobs that pay really well. So, Symone, thanks again for joining me to share some of your insights with our listeners.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me back, Katie. I'm excited to be back to share all of my insights and just things that I'm seeing in GovTech for 2024.
Right. And like I said, you have a lot of experience. So, first, let's talk a little bit about where you're at right now. So, tell us more about what kind of work you're doing and how you hope to make your impact in the GovTech space and maybe any side hustles that you're willing to share.
Right, right. So I did take a break from my job. So I did resign back in September. So I was a federal technical account manager at a startup called Exonius. So Exonius Federal Systems, and that was great. While I was there, I was there for a little over 12 months. And now what I'm doing is really taking a break, taking some time out to focus on some more certifications, also building up my business as well. So the main certification that I want to get is the CISSP, and I'm thinking about maybe getting the CASP certification as well. And then I'm launching a GovTech staffing firm too. So I'm launching that within the next few weeks. So that should be great. You know, my goal and my mission is to help as many people get into GovTech as possible because there's so many different tailwinds for people to get into this industry now. And I think that it's the best time to get in. So I don't know if you saw that article that came out or that the executive order came out about the direct hiring authority to be able to hire more IT professionals, AI professionals, and cyber professionals. So, I mean, I think it's a great time.
Right. Well, and the National Cyber Director recently, talked about maybe relieving some of the degree
Hmm.
requirements to get more folks into cyber, which honestly, like, I'm totally on board for because I know that there's really a need for candidates, particularly within the cleared space.
Right.
And I mean, it kind of sounds like it's really important to understand within your own career trajectory. My goodness, when you kind of need to take a step back, maybe from full time work, and really lean into those side hustles and what your passions are. So it sounds like you've been kind of evaluating your goals, and I'm so excited to see what's next for you. But the commercial tech industry is obviously different from government for a number of reasons, like including processes, rules and regulations,
Hmm.
and pay, to name a few. But I read about software and cloud architects, developers, network or info security types, DevOps engineers, machine learning and AI, really making the most amount of money. And so it obviously depends on location and cost of living. But what do you think are the highest paying tech jobs, maybe outside of government?
Yeah, I would say the highest paying tech jobs outside of government are still software development, of course, AI. I mean, I've seen some AI roles that are paying over $500,000 a year, and I believe that's like base salary. Total comp
Right.
is more closer to 3 million a year, which is insane, right? So, but those are the best of the best in AI, you know, pushing the technology forward. I already said cyber, cloud, of course, cloud and DevOps. There's DevSecOps as well. I would say those are the highest paying for sure. So, you know, when it comes to people getting into roles that are outside of government technology, you know, I don't have experience with that, but I know it's a completely different world when it comes to somebody trying to break into the commercial tech industry, you know, in the non-public sector.
Right. Well, and especially with the pandemic, I know that we saw from a job seeker's perspective, like people hopping out of the security clearance world into the commercial tech space to
Hmm.
maybe get that half a million
Yeah,
dollars.
yeah, yeah.
But so let's talk about security clearances then. And if that's maybe a level up for your pay potential, would you say
Mhm.
that those positions in the commercial tech are the same high paying positions for government? And what do you think are the maybe top 5 paying jobs in, the cleared industry or GovTech?
Right. Well, of course, you know that in GovTech, they don't pay as much as you would get in the commercial industry working at a big tech or FANG company, but there are ways for you to still make a lot of money, right? So like AWS, they pay a $45,000 mission bonus for people who have their full scope polygraph clearance, right? So and
Right.
that's on top of everything else. So you have your base salary, your regular AWS bonus, shares, and the mission bonus, right? So there are ways to make more. And then I also say definitely like if you're in cyber and then you have a full scope, that's going to allow you to make more money too. And then also if you do like what I did, which was go work overseas, and that exponentially increases your income, right? So that's ways for you to definitely make more money in GovTech if you don't want to go and work at other places. But I would say, you know, the clearance, as we all know, is the most valuable piece to working in this space because not everybody has a clearance, not everybody wants to get a clearance, and then you know it's also only for specific people, right? So not everybody can get one.
Right. Well, and I know that I hear from recruiters all the time within the cleared industry, like
Mhm.
they really are after those secret squirrels that have the polygraph.
Yeah.
And I feel like for listeners, it's important to note like I hear from job seekers sometimes, oh, like nobody's going to sponsor me for a polygraph. There are certain agencies that maybe don't have a backlog on their schedule for folks sitting for the polygraph that will sponsor that polygraph. And so, since you talked about working overseas, and I know that in our last episode you talked about this a little bit, you can make a lot of money doing that. And
Yeah.
so, would you be able to speak to maybe some of the like nitty gritty parts
Mhm.
of that for maybe listeners who haven't worked overseas previously?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, I first want to talk about how there is a huge misconception about companies not sponsoring for full scope polygraphs, right? So, something that a lot of people don't know is that a lot of these jobs, if they stay open for too long, especially on the government contractor side, right, they don't get paid. So, the government contractor companies do not get paid by the government if that job is unfilled. So, if a role has been sitting on one of these websites for 2 months, 3 months, I've seen some roles sitting on the websites on the career sites for 12 months. If you
Mhm.
apply and you're the most qualified, trust me, they will sponsor you, right? So there was a time where when I was coming back from overseas, from Taiwan, I had ended up applying to essentially the exact same role, but it was Raytheon. They were a sub on it, and Lockheed was a sub on it as well. They both gave me offers for the exact same position, and they both were going to sponsor my full scope polygraph, right? So you are able to do that even though the job posting said that they weren't sponsoring. The job posting said
Right.
you already had to be cleared. But I applied to it anyway and they're like, "Hey, yeah, we'll bring you on. We'll put you through the process." But then the pandemic hit and you know that backlog got super long and I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I can't wait like 18 months." At that time, they didn't even have an ETA on when it would possibly be done. So I was like, "Okay, well," and that's how I got to Fort Hood. But back to overseas, right, and how you can get overseas and become an overseas government contractor. So what I did overseas, I was a radar system engineer. For the people who don't know, and basically with that, I was working on different forward-based radars. I was working on UAVs, so Global Hawk. So I was working on these different programs, and basically, like if anything happens with the system, you're the person responsible to analyze the issue, fix it, and get the system back up and running, right? So when it comes to getting these jobs overseas, you already have to have a clearance for the most part. For most of the roles, you already have to have a clearance. For a lot of the radar system engineer roles, you already have to be internal. So that's specific to Raytheon and a lot of other contractors that I know. Like you know, they usually hire internally because they want you to already either be familiar with their system or be able to quickly deploy you overseas. So Raytheon, they'll hire somebody internally and they'll deploy you overseas within 30 days, right? So, you know, it's hard to get somebody from the outside in that quick. But when I was on Global Hawk, we did hire, I think, 2 or 3 engineers that were outside of the company. So I think that is changing some. But there are companies like Vectrus that will sponsor your clearance and allow you to go overseas, even if you don't have a clearance whatsoever. So if you go onto Vectrus's website, you can look on there and you can see they have different entry level roles. I actually just did an interview with one of my previous clients. I had a consultation with him in 2019, and he had ended up getting a help desk role where another person that I know, she brought him on and he got his, I believe it was his CI poly, he ended up getting for a help desk role in New Mexico. And then he applied to the role with Vectrus. It was an entry level cybersecurity role. He didn't have any cyber experience, just help desk and security plus, and he was making $269,000 a year in, I believe it was Kuwait or Qatar overseas.
Mhm.
So it's a lot of money to be made, and the reason why it's a lot of money to be made is because when you go overseas, you have your base salary and then you have an uplift for it being difficult to staff people, right? So they have a hard time getting people to go overseas. So you typically get 15% just for it being hard to find people that actually want to go and work there and that will stay for 12 months. Because there are a lot of people that go overseas and then after a month or 2 months, they're like, hey, I don't want to do this.
I'm
I'm going
done.
back home. Yeah, yeah. And sometimes it's not that bad, right? Sometimes it's not that bad. But when I was in Taiwan, we actually worked on a mountain, and I had one coworker. He was, after 2 months, he was like, I don't want to live on a mountain anymore. He was like, I'm done. I'm going home. So there were, and then some people don't even make it out of training. They're just like,
Right.
they get in their head and then they don't even make it overseas. And then so also back to like the pay structure and why you get paid so much. Depending on where you're at, you might get hazard pay. So sometimes it's not like a war zone or anything, but you'll still get hazard pay. So that could be an additional 30-40% on top of that. And then you also get overtime. So a lot of the positions overseas, usually you're working at least 50 hours a week. Sometimes, like when I was in Taiwan, I was working 92 hours a week. So I was basically
Right.
living at work. It was kind of crazy. And then you also have bonuses too. So you'll have, it could be a monthly bonus or a quarterly bonus or a yearly bonus, and it just all depends on the contract. And then you also get R&R. They pay you for that as well. And then your housing is paid for, your transportation is paid for, literally everything's paid for, right? And then you have foreign income exclusion, which makes it to where you actually don't have to pay any federal taxes up to, currently it's the first $120,000 that you make. So if you live in a state that doesn't have any state income taxes, and then you have your first 120,000 tax free, you're able to really do a lot with that money.
Right. Well, and that was kind of the pull. I mean, I didn't staff for deployable contracts that were
Hmm.
necessarily like in your world, but I focused on intelligence. And so it was an easy pull for some people. Like, hey, and it was, we worked on 3 month rotations, 6 month rotations, and then year long rotations, dependent on the location. And at that point, this was prior to the pandemic. We were
Right.
working Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq,
Mhm.
and Jordan. And
Mhm.
so, there is money to be made, and it's not all cookie cutter, I guess, when
No,
you're
no.
looking
Yeah,
for some
it's
of this
all
deployable
contract
work.
dependent. Yeah, it's all contract dependent. Every contract is different. Like, I worked on so many different contracts with Raytheon, all internally, right? And they're all different. So every contract has a different pay. Every contract has different rules and regulations based on the country that you're in. Like, so for South Korea, they had different laws for all of their workers. They had different labor laws. So we could only work but so much. And then after, once we did work a certain amount of money, we had to get paid time and a half. And that was something I
Mhm.
never had before overseas, right? I was working 92 hours a week. I wasn't getting paid time and a half, right? So, but in South Korea, it was like once you hit 40, everything after that's time and a half. So it's
Wow.
all contract dependent and location dependent. So, when you're looking at these different offers, once you do get an overseas offer, you really have to ask the right questions and analyze and make sure that it is going to be a good contract, because some contracts they don't even really pay for your housing, right? So like
Right.
Raytheon, everywhere we went, all of our housing was paid for, all of our transportation was paid for, but it's not like that at all of the for all contracts. So
Right.
it's all dependent.
Well, and these are really great questions to ask when you're interfacing with recruiters. And I know that we have a ton of deployable positions listed on
Hmm.
clearancejobs.com, but I really want to talk about because since the pandemic, I saw a bunch of cleared candidates kind of switch to the commercial industry.
Hmm.
And then we saw layoffs. And so we've seen that
Hmm.
national security or government really can be insulated from things like that. And what we see in the commercial tech space, I feel like, month to month. And so that job security may overcompensate for a loss in salary. That I just think that's something important to note for those who may be toying with like, okay, I can make a lot of more money in the commercial space, but like GovTech is a really insulated world to work in. Like, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I call it recession proof and layoff proof, right? So even if
Mhm.
you did happen to get laid off, if you have the clearance and the experience, you should be able to find a new role, especially if you're applying on clearance jobs. I mean, you should be able to find a new role within a month, right?
Right.
So, I mean, whenever I go on interview sprees, I'm usually able to get 4 offers within 2 weeks. So it's
Yeah.
not that difficult, right? So it's like, but I also know a lot of people that work in the on the contractor side that will just take time off, right? Like how I'm doing. So you could take time off, and then once you're ready to go back, you just start applying, and boom, you're right back at it because you still have your clearance. um but there was something that I did want to say. I think it just jogged my mind. Oh yeah, so I think that when people do decide to switch from the government sector to the commercial space, they don't really take into account the recession proof and like layoff proof aspect of this industry, right? Because okay, yes, you could go work at a big tech company, but I think that there's a lot of things that big tech is facing that a lot of people don't talk about. So when you go to that side, a big issue that you have to deal with, and Apple was actually fined for this. They prefer to hire non-Americans over Americans. So you're
Because it's
facing
cheap.
that. Yeah, because it's cheaper. So H-1B visas, you're facing
Mhm.
that. Then you also have they are outsourcing to offshore people as well, offshore talent. So you have that to face. Then you also have AI that you have to face as well because they're laying off a lot of people because of AI. And even Amazon, their Alexa team, they were working AI, but they got laid off because Alexa was not built on a LLM. So, that's something
Right.
that you have to face as well. And then you're also battling the best of the best talent for these positions, right? So I think that, the peace of mind and the steady, stable, high salary that you get in the GovTech space, to me, it can't be beat, right? So if I ever worked at a big tech company or FANG company, it would have to be in the cleared space, right? Because you can get a clear job with AWS, you can get a clear job with Microsoft, Google. They all have them. That's the only way that I would personally do it because again, they're not going to want to lay somebody off that either they paid to get their clearance or is somebody that's doing the cleared work for them, right? Because everybody at the company can't do it.
Right. No, and that's a great point. And that's why I love, telling people to target those companies that kind of work in both because
Hmm.
sometimes you do want a break, right? We're all human and sometimes need a break from wanting to work remotely is really the biggest thing.
Hmm.
But let's talk about kind of pivoting careers, especially when your upward mobility has kind of plateaued or you have an outdated skill. And so I see this a ton with folks that are transitioning out of the military, but really this can go kind of across the job seeker landscape. And so it's hard to pivot sometimes when you don't have the necessary experience that's required for some of these openings or the certifications that you kind of speak to. So, how do you recommend listeners be able to pivot to some of these high paying gigs in GovTech?
Yeah, I mean, I would always say start with the certifications, right? You have to have them. So, we have the DoD 8570, and then they've
Mhm.
moved over to the new protocol, which they aren't really using. If you look at the job postings, they all still
Yeah.
say, IAT level 2 certified or IAM level 3, right? So, I would always say start with the certifications. Start with that. Also, start looking at the job postings. You can look at job postings on clearance jobs and you can see what are the basic qualifications, right? And start working on those skills, working on getting the basic qualifications. You can redo your resume, you can leverage AI. So I like to tell people to leverage ChatGPT to redo their resume. also
Yeah.
start networking with recruiters as well. There are a lot of recruiters that are constantly hiring for roles that are sponsoring clearances, but you do have to be willing to relocate a lot of the times. So, like, unless you're in an area like the DC area, or you're in Colorado Springs, or you're already in Boston, right? Because no, for whatever reason, nobody wants to work in Boston. So, but like if you're already in those areas, then most likely you won't have to relocate. But that's a good way to get your foot in the door. And I like to tell people, it's temporary. You don't have to live wherever you're moving to forever. If they pay for your relocation, you only have to be there for 12 months, and then you have full freedom to go wherever you want, right?
Right.
So I think people who are trying to transition, if they can't find anything in their area, just try to be more flexible. And then also, the government, with their new DHA executive order, right? They're looking to hire. So I've heard of some agencies that aren't even interviewing, right? So
Yeah.
you could apply, get your resume right for the federal government roles that you're trying to apply to, tailor your resume to those, start applying to them, and you never know. Like I said, I mean, I think this is the best time to get into GovTech. It's the easiest time, and we have a lot of executive orders that are coming down to help people. So start with the certifications, do your resume, network, and just apply as much as possible. And if you have the ability to go to in-person events, that's even better.
Yeah. I was going to say industry events are
Hmm.
super important when it comes to networking, and not even like it's not going to be an immediate hiring event, but you're networking for like the next 6 months or the next 12 months. Like that's what you should have in your head. And I love that you say be flexible, because that is the follow the money. Just follow the
Yeah.
money. That's the
Yeah.
easiest way to get
Yeah,
into
I mean
this
that's
industry.
yeah, it's the easiest way to get in, and it's the easiest way to stay in, right? So when the pandemic hit, my whole life changed. So a lot of people don't know this. I came back from Taiwan, literally I came back from Taiwan November 2019, and everything shut down around March, right? So I had new contracts that I was supposed to be deploying to Qatar for. I had a 2-month contract that was going to pay 50,000, and I was going to be installing a new radar system out there in Qatar. That fell through. So I was not able to actually get to Qatar because the pandemic hit. And literally the day before I was supposed to leave, my manager calls and he's like, "Hey, Raytheon's too worried that you're just going to get like abandoned out there on the way to Qatar. So we have to cancel the flight." And then from there, had another 9-month contract come up, and the Air Force wouldn't let contractors fly on their planes then, right? So there's things that can happen sometimes, but the way that I was able to overcome that is by being flexible. So I went back
Mhm.
home. I did some remote work for Raytheon while I was at home, and they told me, they're like, "Hey, you have 2 weeks until you can, if you don't find something in 2 weeks, we're gonna have to lay you off," because I was doing overseas work. So I went on the internal website. I saw a position at Fort Hood for another senior radar engineer position, and I took that. Right, so I called the hiring manager. I'm like, "Hey, are you still hiring?" He said, "Yeah, can you go to Fort Hood tomorrow?" I said, "Sure." And
Mhm.
then 2 days later, I was in Fort Hood. Right, so because of the pandemic, you had to go through approvals and stuff. But 2 days later, I had moved to Austin, Texas. Never had been there in my life. So sometimes you just have to be flexible, and I think that's the different side, right? Because I've been overseas. That's pretty much what I do the most, right? I'm very flexible, able to move around. I'm okay with that. So, but even if you're trying to get into the industry, be flexible at first, be open minded. They take care of you, right? They'll pay for your relocation package. They make sure you and your family are okay. So it's not like you're in a tough situation.
Right. Well, and I've seen so many freaking sign-on bonuses that are like
Hmm.
50K and then a retention bonus on top of that. So like follow the money. The government has a recruiting and retention problem. So use
Yeah.
that to your favor right now when it comes to trying to break into this industry. And so I want to talk a little bit more about you, Simone. So 2023 was an incredible year for you. What I really loved watching. You
Thank you.
had some really cool brand deals with some big tech companies that work in government as well. And you were a guest on so many other podcasts aside from ours. And you became the VP of Blacks in Tech Atlanta. You
Hmm.
moderated panels, you spoke at conferences, and you
Yeah.
launched an interview series and hosted some really cool community events. So I want to talk about that interview series and tease to that here. But I
Okay.
also want to see what's next for Simone in 2024.
Yeah. So what's next for me? I'm so like I said, I love working overseas. So I'm looking for like a short term contract, 1 or 2 months, three
You got
months
the
max.
itch.
Yeah, it's just something about it. I don't know. I just love it. I don't know. I'm a creature of habit, so I really want to go back overseas, do like a 1 2 month contract. Did a vacation in Japan, and I lived in Japan for almost 2 years. I was like, I want to go back overseas. Like even if it is short term, I want to go back overseas and do some radar system engineer work. So that's something that I'm looking to do, and then also like I said before, launching the staffing company, and then I'm also launching a GovTech conference, right? So this should be in DC. We're looking to have it in September, October, and it's going to be massive, right? So it's going to be about 1,500 to 2,000 people in attendance. So it's going to be pretty big. So I'm excited to share that with everybody, and we're going to be hiring people there. So having recruiters, having government agencies, government contractor companies. We also will have technical workshops and keynote speakers. So it's going to be a great event to network, and hopefully people can land their first GovTech job or get a better GovTech job, right? So that's the
Love
goal
that.
there.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I love events like that. I am definitely like a social butterfly, but I
Mm.
think before the interview I said sometimes I need to decompress, but I'm
Yep.
so excited to hear about this event. I'm so excited to see where you go in 2024. So, Simone, thank you for joining me for this episode. For everyone listening, if you want to learn more about how you can get a job in GovTech or how to obtain a security clearance, you can always visit news.clearancejobs.com.